Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King. I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Doing well, King. It's always good to be with you, and it's good to be back with you since we've had to postpone for a few weeks here. So I'm great this morning and looking forward to being in conversation.
Same here. We got started at an earlier time, still working through some of the challenges we've had that's caused us to postpone. So I hope our listening audience bears with us. And for those who's listening to us today, welcome back, and we appreciate it. For those who catch us on replay, we definitely appreciate the watch and support and look forward to the engagement. So with that being said, Reggie, what's your spiritual energy numbers today?
Definitely a 10 out of 10. I didn't have to make that intentional, even though I could have. It's just there today. It's for a lot of good reasons. I'm firing on all cylinders as far as I can tell.
Excellent. I'm also a 10. I've had my challenges being a 10. I definitely got a challenge for the last 6 weeks to be a 10, which is, one of the things that I've learned. That's when you really appreciate the importance of being a 10, is when you have to challenge yourself, when your initial mind tells you, no, here's all the reasons you're not a 10. And it gives you a list of those reasons. And then you have to counter that with, here's the reasons why I should be a 10. And I'm going to be a 10. And with that being said, that's where a gratitude moment comes in. Mm-hmm. That's where, to me, those two go hand in hand. Yep. And then once I go through my gratitude list and I'm able to say, which I'll say now, that I'm grateful for life, health, ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have sound mind, as well as a mother who's still here, still has sound mind, still functioning, even though she's transitioned to another phase of her life, but her mind is still sound. So that's still a blessing. So when you go through that, it's hard for me to see any number valuable or worthy or better than being a 10. So that's my gratitude moment and my 10 summed up.
Yeah. So I'm grateful for my indoor plumbing, as always. Get to take a shower, get to flush a toilet, and not everybody on the planet gets to do those two things. I'm grateful for my refrigerator with food in it and mostly reliable electricity. And just for general, as far as I can tell, good physical and mental health. I always trust that you'll let me know if you feel my mental health is slipping. But just to get up every day and do good work that I believe in, and to be surrounded by friends and extended family whom I love and who love me. And I just recognize that that just puts me in a really small percentage of people on the planet, because there's a lot of suffering around the, in this country and around the world. So I'm just really grateful for the work I get to do and the benefits that have come my way.
Absolutely. One quick question that just hit my mind before we get started.
Yeah.
Just curious, with you being of Italian heritage, mm-hmm. Is there a particular favorite Italian dish that you love? Like that, you mentioned your birthday before the show started, that you want to have on your birthday, even though it may not be the healthiest for you, but it's just something that you feel that you're going to treat yourself with?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. So I'm not really a big person, but I love to eat. I've learned how to eat. So growing up, my favorite Italian dish was ravioli, cheese ravioli. But almost virtually any pasta works for me, cooked well. So I admit I don't have a favorite. I cook, and I love to cook. I love cooking pasta, whether it's linguine or even a ziti with sauteed spinach, garlic, and oil. But then marinara sauce and various other sauces work well. So almost any pasta, but I'm a fairly diverse eater. So I love my Italian food, but I'll eat virtually anything that isn't liver. Yeah. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to ask you, what about rigatoni? Is I'm pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, rigatoni. Sure, that's good. In fact, I have some. I actually bought some yesterday. Pasta prices have gone up since COVID, so whenever I can get it on sale, I get it. But yeah, almost any of the kind of tubular pastas like rigatoni or ziti or penne, those are all fine. Like I don't. Some people like just have these biases against, they only like spaghetti, or they only like ravioli, or they only like rigatoni or penne or something. I don't understand that. Maybe my taste buds are immature, but cooked well and seasoned appropriately, they're all good for me. Yeah.
Well, one other quick question. Boston Celtics won the NBA Finals, obviously, right?
Yeah.
And Jason Tatum is from my hometown of U City, Missouri. And one of the commentators, post Game 5 when they won, he asked him. He said, "Well, listen, Jason. I just, I spent a lot of time in St. Louis, and I know you're familiar with this restaurant that only you and I would know about." Well, he mentions a restaurant called Emo's, which is, if you're from St. Louis, you'll know what Emo's is, like a fast food Domino's, but much better than Domino's. People in St. Louis would curse me out for calling it Domino's, but just want to use a way to relate. But one of the other restaurants we have, I think Emo's has it, a specialty in I've only seen this in St. Louis. I wanted to ask, are you familiar with it? Have you ever tried it? It's fried ravioli.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think. So it definitely appears on menus around here. You can get it here for sure. Here in the greater New York, Connecticut area. When I say here, I'm trying to think back if I've actually ever had it, and I think I may have, but years ago. Typically nowadays, I try not to eat too much fried food. And just for me, because ravioli I don't think it needs to be improved upon too much.
Right.
But it's definitely available. So it's on menus, within 10 miles of where I'm sitting, I can get fried ravioli, but I haven't had it recently, and I'm not sure if I've ever had it. Yeah.
It's hard to get here.
Yeah.
It's pretty much impossible to get here in Maryland.
Okay.
But that's just a delicacy in St. Louis. When you say you have it in New York, so that's interesting. So I was just curious. Watch a movie, had a lot of. Anytime you watch a movie with mainly an Italian culture perspective, food is going to be a huge part of it. Yeah. So that's what brought about those questions that I had to ask.
Yeah, if we had more time, I could tell you about growing up, being at my mother's parents, my grandparents, with 25 cousins from that side of the family in one house with all the aunts and uncles on a holiday. And there was, it's not an exaggeration. There were courses of food throughout the day. There was a meat dish, there was a pasta dish, there was salad, there was a fish dish, we just kept on coming out. It was and you think, how we grow up, we talk about cultural givens, to bring it kind of back into what you and I have been talking about. If you're a kid, you figure that's just how the world is, like that everybody eats that. Not necessarily the same exact food, but there's always all this food coming out. And they weren't rich. My grandparents were peasants from southern Italy, but they made enough money to buy good food, buy a lot of food on Christmas and Easter and Thanksgiving. But I found out as I got older that not everybody had that much food, or food that was that good necessarily. I have some friends that grew up with horrible I went to their house and they put the food on the table, and there was this, and I thought this platter was my food, but it was for everybody. As I was looking around, saying, "Where's everybody else's dish?" I mean, I didn't actually say that, but I got to see that. Wow, they don't put as much food out there. There were always leftovers at my grandparents' house and at my own house as well. They didn't cook just enough for today. So anyway,
interesting. Yeah. So that's segue into our actual main topic. Why don't you walk us into what our topic was going to be about today?
Yeah. So this is a complete non sequitur, nothing to do with Italian food. So we're speaking about, in the larger context of my 2022 book, Healing America's Narratives, subtitled The Feminine, the Masculine, Our Collective National Shadow. And for 2 years now, we began this in June of of 2022. Is that right? No, June of 2023. I forget now. But this is our second year doing this.
Yes.
But, basically, we've been talking about elements of the collective shadow of the United States. So on June 14th, last week, the Supreme Court overruled a Trump-era ban, a 2018 ban on bump stocks, which is the stock you can add to a semi-automatic weapon that makes it easier to shoot more rounds quicker because it absorbs the recoil of each round as it's being fired. And you might be able to explain it better than I can. But it was after the Las Vegas concert slaughter where I think 58 people got killed, and then the Parkland Marjorie Stoneman Douglas slaughter in the high school in Parkland, Florida, that amazingly the ATF under the Trump administration and with the blessing of both sides of Congress passed a ban on the bump stock in order to make it harder for somebody to shoot that many rounds more quickly. And a Texas gun store owner who was required to stop selling bump stocks and to return them, kind of redeem them at ATF because he could no longer sell them. He filed a lawsuit in 2019, the day before the law went into effect. And it came to the Supreme Court this month, and the Supreme Court overruled the ban so that bump stocks are now legal again. And it was a 6-3 vote where even though we have this myth and this fable that the Supreme Court is objective and it's not political, but the 6 justices appointed by Republican presidents, same 6 who overturned Roe v. Wade, voted to overturn the bump stock ban. And the 3 left-leaning judges, 3 women, appointed by Democratic presidents, dissented. And so what I wanted to talk about, so that just that's out there, what I really want to talk about is for over 20 years now, it could be 30 years, the United States Supreme Court and the United States Congress and some United States presidents have been kicking gun safety regulations. And we're not talking about banning guns. That's never going to happen in this country. I can't imagine. Maybe in 500 years or 1,000 years if things change. But nobody's talking about banning guns, but they're talking about making it harder for straw purchases to take place, to making it harder for everyday people to have automatic and semi-automatic weapons, a lot of other things. And from my book and from our previous conversations, I try really hard not to talk about Democrats versus Republicans because I hold all the parties accountable for their shit, basically. But in this case, it's especially post Sandy Hook, which was 2012, it's been the Republicans in the House of Representatives and the Senate who have met with the families after each school shooting, heard what they have to say, and continued to vote against more common sense gun safety laws. So the point that I want to make is the people in Congress and the Supreme Court justices, by definition, they all have college educations. Most of them have graduate degrees because they went to law school. All the Supreme Court justices have, JDs, Juris Doctor degrees. They all are, strong, logical thinkers. They're all very articulate. Not everybody in Congress is anymore, but the Supreme Court still is. And they have this verbal and logical intelligence they're really good at. But many of them seem to lack interpersonal intelligence, intrapersonal intelligence, musical intelligence, visual spatial intelligence, other intelligences which we as human beings have, besides just the linguistic, verbal, and logical, mathematical skills. You can't get through law school with good musical intelligence or good visual spatial. You have to have the logical and linguistic. So as over 100 Americans die every day, and that's a current statistic, and it's been that number for some years now, we have the highest court in the land and the highest legislative body in the government refusing to take any real action that they can take to perhaps make it safer for school kids and concert goers, people who shop at Walmart, people who dance in clubs. I'm just thinking of all the places where mass shootings have taken place. And the mass shootings are a tiny minority of those 100 deaths a day, because most of the deaths aren't from mass shootings. They're from individual shootings. They include suicide. They include accidents. They include homicide. So in terms of healing America's narratives, we look at the shadow elements of ignorance, arrogance, fear, bigotry, violence, greed, excess, untrustworthiness, and bullying. And all of those are in play as I look at this issue, both in Congress and in many state houses around the country and state legislatures and in the Supreme Court. Not from lack of linguistic and logical intelligence, but some real underlying biases, which are pretty complex. But for me, it means that interpreting the statutes in a way that serves my purpose, whoever I happen to be, Supreme Court Justice, member of Congress, member of the Senate, whatever, is more important for political means than the lives of American citizens. So that's the leap I'm making. And it's been like that really since the late 90s, when the Columbine shooting took place in Littleton, Colorado. And there were some before then, but that was the one that really got the nation's interest. So I'm really eager to have this conversation because, as we've said before, that you're a gun owner, and so you have a perspective that I don't have on this issue. So I just wanted to. I'll shut up now, so you can jump in here.
I'm a gun owner in the context that the environment that I lived in dictated having a gun. Mm-hmm. I believe that when it comes down to it, and that's what I think your book talks about as well, and it's where you and I see alignment, and that's really the theme of our show. I think if you really lead with the mindset of being fully human, you are willing to change a lot of your things that you hold on to when you identify as I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm a liberal, I'm conservative, I'm a gun owner. I'm fully human. So to me, if we became, or our nation decided that we want to get rid of guns, I'm all for it. I wouldn't fight to have a gun. I think gun ownership is a necessity because of depending on where you live. For example, I'm not a pacifist person that, I believe that to protect yourself, if someone breaks in your home, you should have a gun. Now, again, I'm not a person who believes you should have a machine gun that has capability of, semi-auto or fully auto type guns in your home. That to me is overkill, obviously. So I definitely doesn't support that, or that even folks who want to argue that the importance of that. People just want to have certain things just without having government tell them what to do. I believe some people just believe that, period, no matter what it is. They just want to fight for their rights to say, I can do what I want to do. I have the freedom to choose whatever I want, regardless of the impact it has on the world. I think those people, to me, are not thinking fully human when you have that kind of mentality.
Yeah.
Something else that I find to be even more true now, and it may have always been, but we're seeing the ramifications of it now. I remember saying maybe back in the 90s, definitely early 2000s at the least, a movie called Corporation, and talked about how corporations are pretty much running the country, and then manufacturing consent. Other documentaries talks about how capitalism pretty much buys everything. And you talk about the Supreme Court, And he just keeps coming out about how Justice Thomas is pretty much, has accepted more trips and donations and perks, so to speak, from his, uh, from conservative, wealthy billionaire donors or friends, he calls them. And then to look at Lindsey Graham said he's going to vote against any legislation that forces the Supreme Court to create an ethics uh, policy, so to speak. He's going to vote against that. So he doesn't even give a reason why he's going to vote against it. He just, I'm going to vote against it. So to me, it's like, that's the part I really, and that's why I think your book is so timely, because we talk about healing America's narrative so we can get better, but at the same time, looking at examining what does it really mean to become fully human. I believe most people want to be fully human if they realize that was a path to go under or a path to go down, so to speak. Because most people want to live their lives, they want to contribute value to the world, they want to connect to the energy of love, they want to really raise their families. I think most people want to be in that space. I think, but we're led by the minority of people who have their own self-interest. And because we're led by those individuals who now focus their attention on controlling consent and keeping people in a docile survival mode type of existence, this is the ramifications that we see. I mean, for the Supreme Court to come along and say, well, we find it makes sense in our, in our legal minds, as you talk about, they have a logic mind, and their legal minds, at least conservative justices, to say that, well, we're going to put the decision back in the hands of Congress.
Yep.
Even the fact that you even had to think about even changing the law based on this, as you say, this one gun owner who decides that he wanted to take it to the Supreme Court. Why they even, what was the purpose of even accepting that case? A lot of times they turn down a majority of the cases that's presented to the Supreme Court. They turn them down. So you have to even question, why would they even accept that case to begin with?
Yeah.
And then my last point I really want, and again, I've asked this question many times now, and I would ask it again, is how many deaths does it take? And what's the threshold before you say, okay, the need to preserve human life outweighs your desire to be right? At what point do we make that transition in our thinking, in our language, in our conversations, and our choices? Because everything right now is still, I have the right. It's my right. That's what people stand on. And I understand that logically, you're absolutely right. You have the right. You don't want too much government in your way, controlling things. But at what point do we shift and say, to be human and to think about it from a humanity perspective, this is the right thing to do to protect humanity, as opposed to this is political. Everything now has become political.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't even watch basketball now without that being political.
Yeah.
Caitlin Clark has just caught up in this whole political mess. That's not even her fault. But now she's used as a political tool. So that's just where everything is going right now, is if I can find some way to be political and divisive, I'm going to latch on to that. And as we know, gun ownership has been and will always be a huge political divisive point. And again, no one has ever, I've never heard a Democrat ever say, I want to get rid of all guns. Never heard one politician never say that. But the Republicans paint that like that's their goal. Like Democrats' goal is to take away every gun that you have in your home, and you'll never have any firearms. And that's the plateau they stand on, and that's how they come at. It's kind of, I use this analogy real quick as I wrap up. It's kind of like you arguing with a person back in high school. I use a high school analogy so everybody can relate to that. And you see a person that you obviously have a difference with, maybe physical difference, maybe, he plays basketball, you play football, whatever you all choose to be the reason that you want to look at each other and say we're different. And he says, well, we're going to meet after school and we're going to I'm going to challenge you to a fight. And you say, well, you're going to kill me? You're threatening to kill me? He said, well, I just challenged you to a fight. No, you threatened to kill me. So because you threatened to kill me, I'm going to call my uncles. I'm going to get my family involved. I'm going to get the principal involved. And he now comes at you with the fact that he heard and he swears you threatened his life. And all you did was challenge him to a fight. And to me, that's where we are right now. It's like I hear the threat and I'm going to amplify it by 10x. And I'm going to respond as though you threatened me at that 10x level. And that's what I'm seeing so much in our country now. And that's really the sad thing about it.
Yeah, and I want to follow up on. I agree with that, and I want to follow up on two specific things that you said. One is the idea of like even the NBA playoffs or the WNBA, everything is about race. Not everything, but race is brought into it. And what I see there, and this is one of the things that we talk about in the book, and you and I have spoken about. When Trump became president, I spoke about that as both a threat and a gift, because he doesn't know what he's doing. He never lived a life of service. He was only after what would further aggrandize himself and make money for himself and put his name out there. And having that person running the country, especially this country, which wields some power in the world, was dangerous. So that's the threat. The gift is, because of what happened, because of people rallying around him, we got to see the shadow of the country. And so with the examples of, you used, because of Caitlin Clark sets the scoring record in the NCAA, men, women, doesn't matter, for all time. She's an all-time leading scorer. And she earned it. I mean, she can play. All right. And even with the Celtics victory, Joe Mazzulla, the coach, and because he kind of avoided some questions about race in the NBA, because it was the first time they've ever had two black coaches in finals, with Jason Kidd and Mazzulla. And the reporters felt that he could have said more about that. Even Kareem Abdul-Jabbar came out and said that he was disappointed that he didn't say more about it. But for me, it's not about, and you said this, it's not about Clark or the coach of the Celtics. It's about the cultural worldviews that are out there and what comes up because of this one coach and this one basketball player. We get the heartbeat or the pulse of the country, and it's ugly. All right, because they need to report on something. So rather than letting the Celtics coach celebrate his victory, he has to be dragged into, maybe then. I'm not saying there wasn't a time or a place to raise that question with him, but it wasn't in the heat of the playoffs. But both of those stories expose the underlying simmering polarities of the country. Can't just celebrate the leading scorer, can't just celebrate the Celtics, by far the best team in the NBA this year. Dallas had Kyrie Irving and Doncic put together a great game together in Game 4, so they squeaked out one win. But the Celtics were such a better team, there was no doubt they were going to win, at least from a fan standpoint. So that we see the temperature of the country comes up in these stories. That's one. The second thing is where you mentioned corporations. Two of the shadow elements are greed and excess. And I would argue, if you look at everything from the NRA and gun manufacturers lobbying Congress, to the gun shop owner who challenged the bump stock ban, right? Money is at the heart of all of that. Even the NRA, which was founded either during or right at the end of the Civil War to help Union soldiers shoot better. It was like a gun safety and shooting accuracy association, how to better use your firearm. And it was pretty much that through the 60s. Once the Kennedys and Martin Luther King Jr. were assassinated, especially the Kennedys, because the white establishment wasn't as concerned about Malcolm X and King being killed as they were about the Kennedy brothers. But still, there were all these assassinations, beginning with Medgar Evers and then John Kennedy and then Dr. King and Malcolm X and then Dr. King and then Robert Kennedy. Lyndon Johnson, began to speak about gun safety and who could have guns and how many guns we have. And that's when the NRA became more of a political organization. But even with that, in the last 5 years, the NRA has, it still exists, but it's fallen apart because their executive leadership team was embezzling money. Like they were taking all these trips and buying cars and doing these other things with the organization's money. So even at that level, it was about money. Gun manufacturers have to pay their shareholders. If gun legislation convinces some people, it's not worth it anymore, I'm not going to bother buying another 3 guns. I already have 23. I don't need 26. I'm not going to buy more guns. I'm being a little bit facetious here. But from where I'm sitting, and I didn't always believe this, from where I'm sitting, 80 to 90% of these arguments come down to money. Some of the gun ownership and Second Amendment debates are around myths of the founding of the country and what the Second Amendment was intended to mean. It doesn't have that much to do with money. But many of the decisions now, there are thousands of lobbyists in Washington, D.C. I don't know, there's something like 5 or 6 lobbyists for every member of Congress. Maybe there's more, I don't know. And it might have been Braver Angels, but some organization did some research. Don't quote me on it being Braver Angels, but they looked at a series of congressional legislation over the last, 15 or 20 years. And what the American people said they wanted in popular polling and what corporate lobbyists wanted. 100% of the laws passed were according to what the corporate lobbyists want, and 0%, when there was a difference between the two, were what American people said they wanted. So it's not even a democracy anymore.
No.
So all that to say, the money thing, the excess thing, the need for a small number of people to make a lot of money and kind of control the government is what's at play here, whether we talk about gun legislation, climate change, or whatever. And that's part of the narrative. That's one of a series of narratives in this country that really needs to be healed, where healing means coming to terms with what's true, with what is. And as a country, we don't really do a good job with that. We have states banning, teaching what really happened to Native Americans and African Americans. That's not the truth. Because that's not what we always taught. And so it's kind of scary, but it's so much of it comes down to money. Take money out of the equation, and a lot of things shift. Kids are raised in this country. I was raised, not that my parents said this, but basically you get an education so you can go out into the workplace and fit into some company's or some organization's job. You're not taught to go out and figure out what your life is about and live that life. You're taught to get a job in an organization that already exists so you can contribute to the GDP. Okay? We see the evidence of how that doesn't really work. And when anybody speaks out against it, we have to get a really independent thinker or an artist who creates something new, or a musician who stands, or singer-songwriter stands up. They get criticized. We got to stop them. So it's again, I think when I wrote the book, I knew that the money and excess things were important. They were 2 of the 9. But the more I see, this idea of greed and excess is a real driver for people towards the top of the food chain, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And not to get too further away from the topic of the Supreme Court, but just really looking at, if you're talking about greed, and to make this point, in real estate, like the culture of real estate is to play on your ignorance for more money. I mean, at every level. I'll give you an example of what I mean when I say that. If you're a home buyer, the realtor plays on your ignorance, because if the realtor is having financial challenges at home, their Mercedes-Benz payments or lifestyle that they want to keep is being threatened because of the economy is shifting, then you may get a realtor who's going to show you higher end homes, because of course their income is predicated on the percentage of the home you buy. So the more expensive the home, the better the commission they will get. So they're going to be more incentivized based on greed to sell your higher end home. Now, of course, they have ethics and all of these things within real estate that you take and pass, but ethics goes out the window, as we know, when it comes to greed or when it comes to survival mode. Then you have the contractors who will take advantage of you. You're ignorant. If you don't know anything about construction, you know anything about contractors, then the worst thing you can ask a contractor to do when you walk into a home is, how much would it cost to fix this? That's the worst question you could ever ask, because the contractor already knows you don't know anything at all about construction and working with a contractor. So now you're giving me the opportunity to fix the bathroom, to fix the kitchen, high-end appliances, low-end appliances, letting me go purchase a thing and I can add my margin to whatever tools and supplies I buy. So on to the real estate investors who take advantage of you, on to the lenders who put you in a bad loan, to the banks who also put you in a bad mortgage, and to the politicians who now create or go the Fed, so to speak, more so than politicians, who play with the interest rates, raising and lowering the interest rates. All that is driven by greed, and that's the sad thing about it. So at every level we deal with, that's what we're experiencing. And that's why, and now going back to your Joe Mazzulla, years ago, before I really began to see my identity as a fully human, I would have felt, I never really liked Joe Mazzulla until now that he's won. Of course, now he's won. I'll get him and say, okay, well, I give him a little more leeway, and maybe I was wrong about him. But I didn't like he had a very arrogant kind of persona. Like, he wasn't down to earth. He wasn't engaging when the reporters asked questions. He was, and then his look is always unkept. So I never really liked him. But what I will support him on this is that once you change your identity, and I don't think he identifies himself as being black first. That's not the dominant thought. So to him, he's not even thinking about the fact that, well, I'm a black coach and I'm playing against another black coach. This is historic. He's thinking like, well, he's tapped into his Italian culture, probably first and foremost. I'm a coach of an NBA team, and his thoughts are centered around that. So the very question to him is not something he's planning his mind at all. So, and we all know that if you don't say the right things at a certain time when you're questioned, that can now be used against you from that point forward. So and then get politicized from that point forward. How you answer. If you come out and say, this is the greatest thing, I'm glad to be a black coach, playing against another black coach. The NBA really needed this. It's time that this happened. Now you're going to be called out for that. And because you didn't do it, now you're going to be called out for that. So it's like, no matter how he answers the question, he's going to be judged. And to me, that's where the sad part of it is. I make this point real quick. When I was coming up, I hated Boston. We were taught to hate Boston, particularly if you're black. You just didn't like Boston, didn't like Larry Bird, so that was the culture given that you talk about.
Yeah.
Then as I got older, I began to really research and look at old film and really understand the true talent and gamemanship of Larry Bird. And it's like, I'm mad how I was denied the ability just to enjoy him as a talented basketball player. I had to look at him and say, well, he's a white guy. I got to root against him because Boston represents white people. And, we got to root for the Lakers, and Lakers represent black people. And there's Nothing could be further from the case, but that's a narrative that I was given based on that. And so that's why I'm choosing to be fully human now and not get caught up in all this race thing, because I want to enjoy Caitlin Clark as a basketball player. I don't want to sit here and put race in. Let's see, she's a white basketball player. I mean, for years, we've heard WNBA say, we need more attention. We need more people watching it. We need to make more money for the athletes. Then you finally get that. And now the WNBA is upset because she's getting all the attention. It's like you're never happy. It's like you want, it's like there's this scene in The Wire. I don't know if you remember the show The Wire, if you ever watched The Wire.
Yeah.
But there's a scene where Marlo is he's one of the main characters that came on later in The Wire. It's a drug dealer. And he walks into this convenience store that's on the corner, and he takes out from the counter a sucker. And the security guard is looking right at him. And he takes it and wraps the sucker and puts it in his mouth. And the security guard is looking at him like, please don't do it. He doesn't. He says, now, why would you do that? You know you're going to make me say something to you. And Marlo says to him, and this to me is one of the best lines of that show. He says, you want it to be one way, but it's another way. And that to me is how our country looks at everything. We want it to be one way, but it's another way. And then we're too lazy to do what's necessary to change it, to make it the way we want it to be, like you said before, when it comes to voting. That, Americans can, from a polling standpoint, we can say, this is what we want passed. This is more humanistic. This is in our best interest. But the lobbyists come along and they're going to put forth the effort because they understand the laws, they understand what's required. And then because it's capitalism driven, they're going to make sure the politicians vote what's in the best interest of the politician. And even if you come into office as a political a candidate and you're saying, I'm going to change all that. I'm going to be the voice of change. If you are able to get elected, you're going to join the culture that is there. You're not going to sit here and once you get in office, continue to fight. They're going to tell you, okay, that was some nice campaign speeches you ran before, but let me walk you into the room and give you all the perks that we get as politicians. And more than likely, either you're going to join in and take your perks, or they're going to create some kind of issue with you or understand something you said before, and they're going to make that the number one issue, and you're going to be the media now. It's going to be spun, the narrative is going to be created, and you're going to be taken out of office in some kind of conspiracy. So that's the environment we're dealing with, unfortunately. And again, as you say, the root of all that, the thing that stirs that pot is money. It's capitalism. It's greed.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And I love the line. Once you said it, I remember that scene too. So that was, The Wire was a pretty, in moments, hysterically funny, always very intense, and at times incredibly sad show, but really well done, I thought. In fact, I didn't watch that when it first came out, and my stepson said, you got to watch that. So a young person had to convince me to watch it, and he was right. But so just to go back to this money thing, and and even go back to Joe Mazzulla and Caitlin Clark, and the media, because the media, as we speak about them, are large corporations who have a bottom line and shareholders, so they need to make money, and the way they make money is by keeping us engaged, and the way to keep us engaged is giving us controversy. So people will disagree live, because we don't want to watch the firefighter rescue the cat from the tree anymore. That doesn't get our heart rates up. We want to see human conflict. We, generally speaking, not every single person. So it's a couple of examples of that. So if I'm Joe Mazzulla, I'm coaching the best team in the best basketball league in the world for men, the NBA. And I'm in the finals. And I don't want to lose my job, because that's a real thing. If you're an NBA coach, you don't win, And so, right. So I can't. So I have no experience. I have no business saying this. So, if I were the guy, I don't think there's ever been an Italian prior to Mazzulla who won an NBA championship as a coach. I'm not thinking, I'm an Italian, and there's another Italian on the other. I'm thinking, I got to make sure that we had that one bad game in Game 4, and we got to come back and crush these guys in Game 5. And for people who never coached or never played basketball, the complexities of the game, and the NBA game is different from the college game, which is different from the high school game, which is different from the CYO game. It's a whole different thing. Yeah. So what? Yeah, I'm not really interested in talking about race or ethnicity right now because I don't want to lose my job. And I'm trying to do my job on a national stage where my failures and successes are reported in the news every day. Most of us don't have that experience. If I have a bad day coaching or writing, my client will know if it's coaching, but nobody knows. So that's one. Yeah, he should be allowed to be a coach first because that's what he is. The corporate thing, there's been this, this is ongoing now, and I hate to pick on just one network, but I'll do that now. But I pick on all the networks. But if you look at Fox National News, almost every night they're talking about how unsafe cities are in the United States. And there's a shooting here, there's a shooting there, there's a shooting there, there's shooting there, shooting. But they never report that the people in Congress that they support are the ones who are working very hard to keep the guns on the street. So it's like, are you serious? I mean, the lack of integrity and ethics, to go back to Lindsey Graham, talking about the Supreme Court, the lack of integrity and ethics where they just, cherry pick, information and ignore related information that puts the cherry-picked information into context. And both sides do that. But I think Fox is professionals. I think like CNN and MSNBC are like amateurs when it comes to that stuff. They're not as good at it. But showing how Democratic, because most of the big cities are run by Democratic mayors in Democratic states. Not all of them, but most of them. And how Democrats are ruining the country because of all the shooting. But in New York City, this was a story a few weeks ago, 90-something% of the guns that are confiscated after a crime has been committed, a gun-related crime has been committed in New York City, came from Florida, Georgia, or South Carolina. 90% of the guns come from out of state. And so they have these porous borders where the guns aren't purchased or manufactured in New York. They end up there. But that's not reported on Fox News when they're showing all the shootings. In fact, the truth of the matter is crime rates, murder rates are down across the country. They still happen, but they're down across the country in the last, 6 months or so. So it's just this cherry picking of information. Both sides do it. And that goes back again to untrustworthiness, a lack of ethics, whether it stems from ignorance or arrogance or a combination thereof. I don't know, but it's one or both of those, and it's motivated by greed. We need to make money. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say that.
Good.
And in today's culture, ignorance can be purchased. Like, I can keep you ignorant by offering you more money. So I don't want you to even become knowledgeable or aware. I'm going to continue to pay for your ignorance. Yeah. I remember Dick Gregory, he once said this about drugs, and I'll say this about guns, since we're talking about guns. He said, now, do you believe that I can, he said, let's just say, for example, I've never been to New York City at all. My first time in New York, and I come out of Union Station. It's Union Station, New York, right?
Grand Central Station.
And he says, do you believe that within 15 minutes I can find drugs? And most people in the audience say, yeah. He says, so how is it a person that's never been to New York City can come off Grand Central Station and within 15 minutes find drugs? And a policeman who's been there his whole life doesn't know what a drug dealer is. Right. And I say the same thing about guns. Yeah. It's like, to your point, I can go outside, and whether it's Baltimore City, DC, different parts of Maryland, and I can find guns to purchase off the streets illegally within 15 minutes. It's not a it's common knowledge, you know, and the fact that the police are unaware of that, or their ignorance has been purchased. So they're ignorant to the fact that where these drug dealers' guns are, so they never really take them off the streets, quote unquote, shows again what really controls our society. It's not, that's what people say we need more police officers. Do we? If the culture hasn't changed, then now you're going to continue to bring more police officers who even may have every intention on preventing crime and doing their best and being ethical. The culture is going to grab them and change them so quickly and let them know, no, this is how we do things. There's, again, from the great David Simon, another series he created called We Own the City. And there's a scene where this police officer who was the main protagonist of the show joins the police force. And his first day, he's young, he's naive. He's like, I'm joining the force to fight crime. And he's sitting there in orientation, and something happens. And then one of the guys who's obviously been there, a more senior cop, leans over to him and says, "Welcome to Baltimore City." Let them know this is the culture. This is so. That's wherever you learn in the academy, you throw that out the window. Yeah. This is the reality of what Baltimore City is, and so you have to step up and accept and adapt to the culture of how to navigate what you learn in the academy, which is supposed to be the law, to what really happens on the street. And then he found his place and he became a corrupt cop. But you saw at the very beginning, he got corrupted by the culture that was embedded into the Baltimore police system. And to me, until we change these systems, that's always going to be the case. Whether you have one cop or whether you have 1,000 cops, they're going to be continued corrupted by the culture of that system, then nothing's ever going to change. It's going to continue to get worse. Yeah. And that's what we're experiencing. And that's what we see in our political system. And now the Supreme Court has gotten to the point where, as you said, I don't even say the Supreme Court can even have it written that they're not politically biased. When you're getting selected by either a Democrat or Republican based off your views, whether you're conservative or liberal. And to me, that should be thrown out. That whole selection process of how candidates choose Supreme Court justices based off being liberal or conservative should be thrown away. This system does not work. It's not sustainable. But because it works for the few, this is what we're going to continue to have to deal with and adhere to, and unfortunately be regulated and controlled by.
Yeah. Well, just to comment on that last piece, a lot of people that I know who are smarter and more knowledgeable historically, and specifically historically with regard to the law and the legal system, say that, the Constitution of the United States and the Declaration of Independence, which was a statement of revolution, not a governing document, but those are two brilliant documents, but they were both written in the 1700s. This is 2024. It's a different world. And while there still are some elements of those documents that are relevant, they are archaic documents for all of their brilliance. And we need a new set of documents or some major revisions to move forward. Because again, those are written by a bunch of white guys who own property. They were educated, they were well-meaning, living within the strictures of their own cultural givens, but they knew that they didn't consider Native Americans human, they didn't consider Africans equal, and they didn't consider women equal. And that's the document that they wrote. Now we've continued to work on undoing those aspects, but 2024, with 248, not quite 248 years into this, we still haven't figured out how to get real equality for women, people of color. I'll expand it out beyond African Americans to people of color and Native Americans, who are also people of color in many ways. So it may be time to realize that neither the Bible, which was written which was stitched together beginning over 2,000 years ago, or the U.S. Constitution. They're not sacred in the terms of being literally true for people in the 21st century. They're not, and it's really dangerous to interpret them as being that way. So I love that you kind of named that in what you said.
Parliament, old George Clinton band, they had this slogan. I remember I had a little flag that had this statement on it. It said, "Think it's not illegal yet." And everything you're laying out there comes from being able to critically think.
Yeah.
And everything in our culture now is to take you away from being able to be a critical thinker.
Yeah.
Our school systems don't teach you to be a critical thinker. As you talked about before, the way you were raised is to get a job, go to school to get a good job so you can be a part of the system that continues to, then you're not taught to be a critical thinker. Here's your religion. Here's what you're supposed to believe. Here's what you adhere to. You question that, now you're stepping outside of normal society. And that's what we're experiencing today. It's like, going back to the Constitution, freedom of speech. I think that, again, from my perspective, giving everybody the ability to have freedom of speech, and then you throw social media there, and now all these people have the ability to get their thoughts out instantaneously, repeatedly. And the more people who want to get their thoughts out and are committed to it are going to have more posts than people like yourself who are critical thinkers. So you don't have time to sit around and just post on social media every thought that pops in your head, how you feel about a certain situation. But there's people who do. And that's all they do. Like, to me, we live in a society that feels the need to pay someone as, and I say worthless in the context of the value he brings to society. Mm. Stephen A. Smith, his salary is nowhere commensurate with the value he brings to society. He cannot justify, of course his ego could, but you look at the overall value, he gets paid at least $10 to $12 million a year just to give his opinion about sports. And he's wrong 90% of the time. That's the crazy thing about it. It's not like he's right, and he's giving some form of valuable insight that we couldn't get from somewhere else. And I can understand why you want to pay him this much money. He gets paid more than doctors, more than lawyers, more than people who actually bring value to society. He gets there just to be a corporate mouthpiece. And it's not just him. It's like all the others. But I'm just using him because he's he's the face of a network of ESPN. Yeah. And that's the society we live in.
Yep.
And so now we live in a world where ESPN and him and Skip Bayless created this world of sound bites and clips to get your eyeballs. Now, and that was on regular TV. Now that's transitioned to social media, and it's even worse now. So now you got folks who are not even trained at all. And at least he's a trained journalist, so you give him that credit. Now you got folks who are not even trained in journalists. They're trained on how to come up with the most sensationalized headline to get you to click on their video, regardless of not even contemplating the consequence of what they're saying, whether it's true, whether it's factual, whether it could be verified or not is irrelevant. It's, I got you to click on what I'm saying. So if I come out and say such and such is a racist, or such and such is gay, or such and such it hates such and such, then now you're going to click on that, and I don't have to have anything to substantiate that, to justify what I'm saying, and that now has become the culture. Again, finally, we saw that with Donald Trump, when I remember, I forget her name now because she's not in this political cycle as much. Name's right on top of my tongue, but you know what I'm talking about. The woman who said we have facts and then we have alternate facts.
Kellyanne Conway.
Yeah, Kellyanne Conway. See, to me, at least the Republicans let you know, okay, well, yeah, I'm going to break in your house. I'm going to steal everything. They let you know. I mean, she's telling you right there, it's alternate facts. Now, if you choose to argue with her on what alternate facts are, you give her the power to create the reality, as opposed to just ignoring her and dismissing her and quickly to say, what? You no longer get any more airtime. I'm not going to consider anything you say from this point forward.
Yeah.
So that's the society we live in.
Yeah. Yeah. God bless us, everyone.
At least she's not in this political cycle, so we don't have to watch her as much.
But I've heard she is involved with the Trump campaign, so she may God help us, she may reappear.
But the sad thing is, we bring this. We get to close at the top of the hour, I should say. Is one of the things that I missed about doing our show was kind of laying out some concrete steps that we can do to bring forth justice or become more fully human. And now let's shift into that segment of our show where you can kind of help people put themselves on a path. The ones who are listening who don't want to comply with the system, but actually want to become more fully human. What are some of the steps that we can take to put us on those paths?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so in the specific context of how we began today, the Supreme Court bump stock overturning the ban on bump stocks, and but more specifically, that was an example of the need for types of intelligence beyond just linguistic, verbal, logical, mathematical, which are the basic things you need if you want to go to law school and certain other areas of expertise. So intrapersonal knowledge is self-reflection, the ability to really know myself well, not kind of just reconfirm my biases, but really do critical thinking, as you were saying. But within, critically think about how I think. And then interpersonal intelligence is that which allows me to get along with other people, and there are others. So just to begin to pay attention to those two things, beyond your ability to speak clearly or to make logical decisions, follow evidence, cause and effect. Just look at your own knowledge of yourself, your values, and how you do things, and your ability to get along with other people and judgments that you make. That's a start. And then to use it in terms of how you assess and make decisions publicly. How you vote, who you vote for, what are the values that lead you to, vote for this candidate or that candidate, to agree with the Supreme Court or not agree with the Supreme Court, to really begin to look at that. Because in the absence, King, as you said, in the absence of critical thinking and real self-reflection, we're doomed. I mean, this is just going to be a nation of ways of keeping our attention on something that's meaningless and increasing our time of engagement on that something. So it's about our attention and our frequency and our duration of engagement. That's what social media is designed to do. And all of the large media companies participate in that because they all create YouTube videos or TikTok videos or little, statements on X. And they're all participating in that for one reason: to keep their agenda in front of our face so that we'll tune in and advertisers will continue to pay them and their shareholders will make more money in their dividends. That's the only motivation, or it's the primary one. Learn to see that, reflect on it, and then decide who you really are as a human being. So that should take you 5 or 10 minutes this afternoon to do all that.
Well, thank you for that, because that is absolutely necessary, and it's critical at this point. It's not even just good advice. Like, good advice could be, slow down when you're driving through a, school district. That's good advice. This is critical. This is things we need to do in order to live a more, again, fully human life. And as we bring the show to a close, we always like to suggest or highlight or lift up people who we feel that have shown or is showing fully human characteristics and behaviors. And I'm going to throw the microphone to you first and say, Reg, you have anybody in mind who you feel warrants your recognition today?
Yeah, I do, and it's actually somebody I should have been paying more attention to for some years and hadn't. But I believe this week is the 28th, and this part I might have wrong. It's not like the 28th anniversary of Ella Fitzgerald's passing. Um, and I've been reading some things and listening to some things about her. First, I didn't realize that she lived in Yonkers, which is where I was from, where I grew up in Yonkers. I don't know how long she lived there, but she lived there as a child for sure. And in an integrated kind of community with African Americans, Polish, Italian, Irish, who kind of got along. And she was born in 1933. So it was a very much an immigrant community, and still is. But just what she did with her voice, with her instrument, and her refusal to be, she's primarily known as a jazz singer, but she sang with everybody. She crossed genres, and I think it was, it might have been Dizzy Gillespie, but I forget who it was that said, "You can't put Ella in a box," something like that. So I just listened to some of her this week, and I'd never, I had heard her on the radio, but I'd never really paid attention to what she did with her voice, and that's a fully human voice. What came through her was amazing. So I'll say Ella Fitzgerald.
And see, for my generation, based on corporate greed, Ella Fitzgerald was boiled down to just a Memorex commercial, where they would use her voice. They would say it's alive or it's Memorex, because they would play her voice live and they would break a glass. Then it would record to the Memorex tape. They would play the Memorex tape and they would break a glass. So they were saying her voice was just, it could be used to break a glass. And that's all I knew about Ella Fitzgerald coming up. I don't know anything else at all but that Memorex commercial. So I learned more thanks to the documentarian Ken Burns, who came out with a jazz documentary series, which I love. I learned so much more about Ella Fitzgerald from that. That blew my mind. So you're absolutely right. I'm going to stay with the music scene as well. Someone who I've known for years as a person, but I want to highlight him now because something that was brought to my attention recently, another step that he did to show that he was fully human, and that's Frank Sinatra. Going with your Italian culture, since you went with my culture. And, what I want to highlight is the fact that Frank Sinatra would fight restaurants and theaters to make sure that blacks who were not allowed to come in to even have dinner or coming through the front door. He would use his power and his social capital. Like, for example, there was a time when he was singing with Nat King Cole, and Nat King Cole had to, come in through the back door, and he had to eat in his dressing room. And Frank Sinatra had a conversation prior to lunchtime, and he wanted to continue the conversation over lunch, and he's like, "Where's Nat?" They said, "Well, Nat can't come out here. He's not allowed. He's black." And he found that out and said, from that point, he said, "Well, if he can't come, I'm not coming. And I won't perform here anymore." And see, when you take those kind of stance, and did the same thing for Sammy Davis Jr. as well, countless other times he stood up for him. That to me shows fully human. When you're willing to say, and see, that's not something I see artists do nowadays. I don't think there's too many artists nowadays who be willing to put their career on the line to say, for justice, if you're not willing to do this for him because of whatever discrimination that's being held against this person, they're gay, they're black, whatever it may be, I'm not going to perform here anymore. I'm willing to put my career on the line, and for this, make sure that you treat this person right because they're human beings, and you're going to treat this person like a human being. See, that type of fully human mindset to me is missing, I believe, from our stars. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I see too many stars nowadays who are famous that their fame has superseded their talent level and willing to jeopardize that for justice. But I'll definitely lift up Frank Sinatra.
Yeah. No, I love that example. I would argue that, and I'm not argue with you. And the irony of that is, it was much it's much easier now to stand up as a famous artist and do some good because, especially in the music industry where, it's becoming increasingly more diverse and integrated, where performers have each other on the stage on a regular basis. When Sinatra did it, it was a lot more dangerous for his career.
Right.
But, he was the guy at the time, and he used his power, so to speak, for good in that regard. It's easier now. I think somebody who kind of does that nowadays, who I just have a lot of respect for, is Brandi Carlile across the board. Because she's a lesbian, but she's on the stage with everybody. I mean, she brings everybody together in so many really cool ways. But no, I think your example of Sinatra is a good one. So for sure.
Well, thank you again. Thank you for taking time and being present and putting forth the effort to bring the discussion to the table. It's definitely needed as we live in this world where there's very few podcasts that really break down critical thinking and what we can do to become better human beings, as opposed to just talking about common culture from a context of just because it gets clicks and not really giving you any value as far as how your day is going to be better as a result of listening to or investing an hour into that particular podcast. Are you better off as a result of that? And our goal is to put you on the path to see value and become a human being and understand the importance of critical thinking and making better choices. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you, listening audience, for listening to another episode of Fully Human Podcast. We're going to continue to put out these podcasts. Still got some things we got to work through in my schedule, but Reggie and I will get together offline and we'll work some things out so we can come to you each week, continue that process. And until next Wednesday, I want everyone to continue to look for ways to become more fully human in everything that you do. Thank you again for your time.